Okay, we are going to go ahead and get started. It's been a couple minutes. Hopefully, people will, uh, everybody who's in here is uh, is in the right place. This is integrating technology in the classroom. My name is Dan Bingaman. I think I know just about everybody that's in here currently. But in case I don't know you, or you don't know who I am, I'm a program advisor for the Central Region. I'm also the distance learning coordinator for the state. And I'm going to be talking to you a little bit today about integrating technology into the classroom. How do you do that? And what are some resources we can use, and so on and so forth. Before I get started, just because I want to make sure that, just because this is kind of a different environment to be doing this, I just saw somebody in the chat say, ask if the presentation was muted. Can everybody hear me okay? Can you give me a thumbs up or something in the chat, or some indication that you can hear me? All right, good deal. Okay, kind of thought so. Just wanted to make sure. Good deal. All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started. I will admit before we start, I don't 100% know how long this is going to take, because this is sort of an abridged version of a presentation that I did a month and a half or so ago for AETN, which will be available for everybody to view in its entirety and kind of go through some of those modules very shortly. But I wanted to kind of do sort of like I said, an abridged version of that for the ACE conference, for those of you who may not hear this any other way. So I will do my best. I certainly won't keep you longer than what we are scheduled to do. We may fly right through it and you guys get out early. So we'll just cross that bridge when we get there. So let me make sure that everything is set up on my end. Okay, good deal. And I will say also that I will do my best to monitor the chat if you have questions as we go through this, but I think it's just me for the most part in here. And so if you have a question in the chat, I promise I will look at it, but it may take a few minutes for me to notice it as we kind of get going. And I'm also just going to turn off my video if that's okay with everybody else, because I kind of don't like that extra pane up in the corner of my screen. So I'm going to stop that. So this is integrating technology in the classroom. Let's get into it. So today's objectives, first we're going to sort of define technology and technology integration in the context of education and your classrooms. We will discuss what research shows about the benefits of technology use in the classroom, as well as I'm going to show you a sort of a helpful model, I think, when you're working towards integrating technology in your classroom that can really help you. And then we will look at a few resources, one in particular that I'm excited about, that I want to share with you all, that I have not previously talked about in other, Canvas or distance learning trainings or at previous ACE conferences. So we will do that as well. So the reality we face, obviously, the past year or so has been challenging for everybody, students, because of the everything going on in the world, and just the progression of technology in the world means that students are more online and more connected than ever. Educational institutions and workforce are expanding their digital and technological capacity, their presence rapidly. It's not, basically, if you apply for a job, if you go to school somewhere, one way or the other, you're probably going to be doing something online, whether it is applying for that job, whether it is doing some aspect of that job, or in school, taking online classes, completing assignments online, and so forth. COVID-19, obviously, in the past year and a half, almost 2 years, has really forced a re-examination of our relationship to work, and our relationship to education, and our relationship to technology, and forced people to advance their skills maybe quicker than they were otherwise expecting to. The point being is, if you are neglecting technology in your classroom, you are effectively setting your students up for failure. So today we're going to talk about how we can sort of prevent some of that a little bit. So the benefits of technology integration, this kind of speaks for itself, I think. Obviously, when you integrate technology into your classrooms, as you start to incorporate more of it with your students, confidence increases, right? Particularly for, I think, older students. older adult students that may not have been as familiar with some of the stuff. As you walk them through it and as you show them how to use various pieces of technology, it really sort of allows them to engage with the world in a more up-to-date way, right? So it's going to build confidence. We're going to improve digital literacy, obviously, the more technology that we can incorporate into our classrooms. Technology provides limitless opportunities for differentiation and for collaboration. And research has shown that the more technology, the more effective use of technology that you can incorporate into your classrooms, you will reap those benefits in terms of retention rates, student achievement, and students actually just retaining the information that you're giving to them. If you can find technologies that suit your teaching style, that suit your the students that you have, and implement them effectively. So what is technology? Kind of a basic question, but I think anytime that we're talking about something like technology integration, it's good to kind of start from the bottom and build up from there. So technology is just the application of scientific knowledge to the practical aims of human life. It's the stuff that you use to help you out or to complete tasks, right? And using this definition, really everything that you are already using in class counts as technology, right? A pen is a technology. The paper that you write on is a technology. Your desks, your chairs, these are technology. And obviously, yes, computers and tablets, these are all examples of technology, but they're not all created equal. We don't use them all for the same thing. And their use or their presence in your classroom does not necessarily mean that you have a technologically integrated classroom. So technology is everywhere. You already have it. So you might ask yourself, well, if everything is technology, why do I need more? Well, kind of as I alluded to, the quality and the type of technology is much more important than the quantity. We've probably all, there are many programs across the state, I should say, that have a lot of resources, depending on where they are. Their LEA has access to a lot of different things. You may be in a classroom that has a smart board, that has TVs, that has laptops, that has tablets, all these things. But if we're not learning how to effectively utilize them, and we're just adding technology to our classroom to say that we're adding technology to our classrooms, that's not necessarily effective. And so when we're talking about technology integration, when I'm encouraging you and when we as a state encourage you to use more technology, what should be implied there is to use more technology more effectively, because the quality of it is more important than the quantity. Effective technology integration, we kind of talked about this a second ago, increases information retention. It fosters accessibility, inclusion, and equity. And it really enhances opportunities for social interaction, collaboration. Obviously, over the past year or so, predominantly when things were shut down, students were not in programs, and they were doing distance learning and things like that. One of the things that we talked about when distance learning teachers would come to me, or when they would come through training, was the importance of fostering community with your distance learning students, so that they felt like they were still a part of your program, that you were still a real live human person that cared about them and cared about their progress and their education. Technology can be very helpful in that aim, right? There's so many different ways that you can reach out online. There's so many different ways that you can collaborate online. So we got to figure out ways to get a little bit creative in how we use that in our classroom. And lastly, because I said so, we need to use more technology. We need to get used to using more technology, and we need to be comfortable with that. So if everything is technology, why do I need more? All of that. So then what is technology integration? Well, technology integration is the routine use of technology in your classroom to increase access, to allow students the opportunity to be a little bit more independent and interactive with the learning objectives that you've set, and to deepen the understanding, most importantly, of the content being covered. The routine use of technology being sort of the key part of that phrase. So if there's a education writer on Edutopia named Mary Beth Hertz. She's pretty prolific if you spend any time on Edutopia, or if you are interested in this topic. She writes a lot about technology use in classrooms, and what she has sort of defined in her practice and in her writing is 4 different levels of technology integration. So we've got sparse, where technology is rarely used or even available in your classroom. A basic level of technology integration, which is where technology is occasionally used. Maybe you have a computer lab at your program, or that students have access to, or sometimes you wheel out the laptops or you wheel out the iPads. So you do use it, but it's maybe not routine. It's not something that occurs frequently. Then there's the comfortable level that she defines as technology being used on a regular basis. Students and teachers know how to use a variety of different pieces of technology. So not just the computer, but maybe different apps on an iPad or on a tablet, of some other kind of tablet, or some software that you have purchased or that you have found at your program. And they use these to educate, to create, and to demonstrate their comprehension. And then lastly, what we're all striving for is sort of a seamless level of technology integration in our classrooms, which is where technology is being used daily. It's an integral part of your instruction. It's an integral part of your students' learning experience at your program. Students and teachers are comfortable and familiar with not only a variety of tools, but they use them to demonstrate not just comprehension, but mastery. And so you are really being able to really target what pieces of technology are going to go with what different types of lessons, and then use that effectively in your classroom. So these are kind of some sort of different levels of technology integration that I want you to think about for just a few minutes: sparse, basic, comfortable, and seamless. And I'm curious, how would you rate your current level of technology integration, thinking about the technology that you have at your class, at your program, thinking about the things that you're comfortable with, the technologies that you're familiar with? Where would you rate yourself in terms of those levels? You can just throw that out in the chat. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about this, but I'm just sort of curious to know how you would rate yourselves. Comfortable, basic, okay. Yeah. Anybody else? This is a safe space, no judgment. Basic, moving towards okay. Yeah. I mean, honestly, at this point in the world, and in education, I mean, any of us that have spent any time in education know that things, there's always a new thing. And so, you've probably, if you've spent any time in education, you've been around enough to have tried a number of different things. And over time, that's probably built your comfort level with technology. But that's good. I want you to sort of think about that. Think about your current practice, and what you use. And we're going to get into sort of why you use what you use here in a moment. So a lot of you have smart boards. Most programs have computers that students have access to of some kind. Most of our students are coming to us with smartphones, with tablets. In some cases, maybe you have tablets at your program. These are the primary technologies that we'll be sort of focusing on today, as they're kind of the ones found most commonly, as I've kind of gone around, and as other program advisors and things have gone around, and we, obviously we review your budgets and we see the kinds of stuff that you guys are buying. This is kind of the stuff that we see most frequently, that is going to be sort of most applicable, I think, to the largest number of people that are in here. So you're likely familiar with many of these. You may have access to some or all of them in your classrooms already. But how often do you think about the way that you use them? Is your use of these resources a means of sort of just checking a box to say that you're implementing technology in your classroom? Is your use of these relevant and meaningful to your students and the content that you're teaching? Or is this, or some other thing, right? I mean, obviously we require a certain amount, we don't require, but we encourage a certain amount of technology. We like to see that being utilized. And so rather than just sort of like going through the motions, we really need to think about what we're using and why we're using it. So you might ask yourself, okay, well, how do I start? Maybe I'm at one of those lower levels of technology integration currently. or maybe I'm comfortable, or maybe I'm seamless, but in terms of the amount of technology that I'm using, but maybe haven't really thought about the why behind what I'm using, or the purpose, or sort of what things might go best with what I'm teaching. So you might ask yourself that. Well, today I'm going to show you a helpful model of technology integration. And if you go to, like I said, this is sort of an abridged presentation a little bit today, because in the course that I did for AATN, we actually talk about two different models. But today we're going to focus on one, just A for time, and B because I want you guys to check out the AATN thing when it becomes available. So a little bit of, it's kind of like one of those things. Have you ever gone to a website to read a news article or something, and you read about half of it and then it cuts you off because it wants you to subscribe to the magazine or whatever it is that you're reading? Think about that here. So we're going to talk about the SAMR model today, SAMR. If you are curious about this other model and some of the other things, I would encourage you to keep your eyes out for this other fuller version of this training that will be available shortly. So the SAMR model is what we're going to be talking about today. And what that stands for, SAMR, stands for substitution, augmentation, modification, and redefinition. And this was developed a few years ago by a man named Dr. Ruben Puendedura. I have a little bit of a hard time pronouncing his name, but we're going to hear from him in just a minute in a video, and I find his voice very soothing. So I like the way that he says his name. I just am not very good at pronouncing it. But what the SAMR model of technology integration does is it really reflects on the how and the why behind technology integration. It doesn't prescribe different, certain specific types of technology, but it sort of gets you thinking about how you're using technology so that then you can find different things that work for you. So it asks, how is the technology being used? What is the learning outcome you expect as a teacher? So at the substitution level, this is kind of the basic level of the SAMR model. Technology is acting as a one-to-one substitute for previous practice. And we'll look at an example of this here in just a minute. At the augmentation level, technology acts as a substitute, but with a functional improvement. And we'll kind of talk about that here in just a moment. Then the modification level, this is where technology allows for a significant redesign of educational tasks. And then finally, the redefinition level of the SAMR model. This is where technology allows for the creation of new tasks, new outcomes, new learning opportunities, previously unobtainable with different or lower levels of technology integration. This is the redefinition level, is really where students are taking ownership of their learning. They're using technology to take what they've learned and transform it in some way, which may sound familiar to you, and we'll get into that here in just a minute. But when teachers first begin to incorporate more technology into the classroom, unknowingly, a lot of teachers spend most of their time and energy on these first two levels, the substitution and the augmentation, particularly what we found last year and a half ago, when all of a sudden things were being shut down and people were having to go home and work from home and learn from home. There was just sort of a mad rush to figure out, okay, well, how can I take what I've done in class and do it at a distance, right? Which is partly why Zoom has become such a large part of everyone's personal and professional lives, because it is a sort of a one-to-one substitute for in-person communicating, right? So what we are, and those levels are important. It's important to figure that out. What the whole purpose of the SAMR model and making you think about it is how to take those technologies and then expand upon them. So I told you I'd give you an example, and I'm just going to give you a very basic one. So we're all familiar with Google Docs, right? That's a technology that has been around for several years. Most of us are pretty familiar with it. It is a basic word processing software, and it's pretty easy to use. You can access it on your laptop, on your phone. It's a good sort of basic technology. So for SAMR, when we're thinking about the substitution level, that first level of this model, let's say that we have an assignment right? And what that assignment is to go into Google Docs and write a paragraph explaining your point of view on a controversial topic, right? What we've done essentially is we have just replaced Word, like Microsoft Word, or even a pen and a piece of paper for Google Docs, right? We haven't really done anything extra with it. Is this technology integration? Yes, absolutely. We've taken something that used to be more of an analog process and we have digitized it. But is this using technology to transform learning? I don't know that it really is. I mean, it's maybe a really great task and not something that you should throw out, but it's not really a transformative learning experience. It's just giving the students the opportunity to do something online or on a computer that they may have previously done on paper or without an internet connection, right? So that's the substitute. So thinking about Google Docs, think about it in this way for the substitution level, and then we're going to expand on that. So then with SAMR, if we go a step further, we go to the augmentation level. So our assignment is the same in Google Docs. Write a paragraph explaining your point of view on a controversial topic, and then you share your paragraph with me, the teacher, to submit it. Right? It's still a one-to-one replacement. we're swapping Word or a piece of paper and a pencil for Google Docs, but now we have a functional improvement in the form of that share feature. Right now, there's some other thing that students have had to learn to interact with, that allows for greater collaboration or easier collaboration than maybe previously possible. So that's sort of the augmentation level with Google Docs. But then if we want to take it a step further, maybe we go to the modification level. So in Google Docs, our assignment is the same. Write a paragraph explaining your point of view on a controversial topic, and then share your paragraph with a classmate. That's our functional improvement from the augmentation model previously. Now, what we want students to do is to use the comment feature to provide feedback to one another, to peer edit, and to collaborate, right? If you've ever used Google Docs, you know that, or honestly, you can do this in Word too, to maybe a lesser extent, but there's a way to use comments to track changes within a document, and you can really have a conversation with one another in the comments about whatever it is that you and another person or multiple other people are talking about, right? So now we've taken it beyond just the share feature, share this with a classmate, share this with the teacher, but now we are taking that assignment and we are analyzing it with other people using technology. The collaboration allows students more ownership of their learning, and it gives them greater opportunities for practicing their digital literacy and so on. And then finally, we come to the redefinition level. So we're really wanting to transform things here a little bit. So our assignment is still the same in Google Docs. Write a paragraph explaining your opinion on a controversial topic. Share your paragraph with a classmate who holds an opposing view, and then collaborate to compare or contrast your views with those of your classmate to create maybe you're creating an essay outlining issues, different points of view, etc. Technology now allows students to engage more deeply with the topic, engage with peers, and synthesize information in a new way. Not only now are we collaborating and we're kind of peer editing and things like that, but we are able to see our classmates' version of this, and we can compare and contrast. And we are now taking the information that we had previously gathered through those first three levels of the SAMR model, and we are taking all of that, synthesizing it, and we are turning it into something new, right? Using the same technology. And this is really just sort of a basic example to help you sort of conceptualize the SAMR model very briefly. But this is, but that's kind of it. It's just sort of taking you up a ladder of different of increased technological integration in your classroom. So I said that we would hear from Dr. Rubin himself. Seems helpful to hear from the guy that actually developed this model and not just me yapping about it. So we're going to watch this video for a few minutes, listening to him. Again, very soothing voice. maybe I'll be the only one that thinks that, but I could just listen to this guy all day. So I'm going to shut up. We're going to watch this and then we will move on.
I think it's important for teachers to evaluate their teaching strategies. From my perspective, speaking now, as somebody who has taught for many years, there's an aspect of saying, well, how can I do this better? What led me to develop the SAMR model was some work I did back in the mid-'80s. I was a graduate student at Harvard at that point, and working on rethinking aspects of the undergraduate introductory science curriculum. And at that point, I could see that some of the tools we had for digital storytelling and so on could really make a change. But it wasn't clear that this was anything intrinsic to a given tool, and rather a question of different types of practice associated with this. So that's what triggered the desire to research the topic and eventually led to the SAMR model. It's very important for people to feel comfortable with the tools, to evolve their practice. So it's just fine for people to say, look, I'm going to start doing what I already do at the substitution to augmentation levels, incorporate the tools, enhance my current practice, and when I'm comfortable with that, move on to incorporating elements at modification to redefinition. That's a perfectly valid approach. In fact, to be honest with you, I think it's the approach that would work for most teachers. There are many things that work just fine at substitution to augmentation levels. For instance, assume I'm teaching a course on poetry. It's fine if I decide as an educator that I'm going to create, say, an ebook that incorporates the poems, some readings of the poems, maybe some critical elements to allow the students to read different interpretations and so on, which would take it roughly to an augmentation level. But it's not necessary to say, well, now what do I do with this book so that the very act of reading the poems is at the modification to redefinition levels. That's just fine. You can say, well, what else in my practice of teaching literature am I going to incorporate that is at the modification to redefinition levels? The difference between augmentation and modification is whether you're essentially reproducing what you were doing before in your practice, or you're significantly modifying it but keeping the heart of the matter. So let me give you an example. Suppose that I'm teaching geography. Okay? If I'm using maps, digital maps, to teach geography, and I say to students, well, I want you to create maps of, let's say you're studying Egypt. I want you to create maps of Egypt that outline archaeological sites that you're interested in, and that also outline areas that were important agriculturally. And you start to see, well, do these in two different layers so you can see correlations between the two of them, etc. Link the archaeological sites to resources on the sites. All of that is quite wonderful. Now, suppose that you're saying, okay, I'm using digital maps, but now I'm not just going to ask the students to replicate what I would have done with traditional paper maps. Instead, I'm going to say I still want them creating maps because it's important for them to develop the understanding of geography. But I'm going to ask them to create the maps in such a way that they're interacting with each other, so that they create the digital maps in shared sites and they use them as gateways to each other's knowledge. So now one student is very interested in the archaeology aspect, and that student focuses on things like where were the temples. Another student is very interested in commerce, so they focus on where were the trading ports, and they create their maps. You have them engaging in a deeper conversation where you're using the digital maps as a gateway for a social practice of exploration. In effect, you're asking your students to become geographers and use the maps to talk with each other, integrate each other's discoveries, build a practice that is mediated by the social use of the tools in a networked environment. That would take you up to modification, because while you still have some of the heart of the matter, make sure the students understand these concepts by developing maps about them. You've significantly modified it by changing it from something they would do individually to something they would do socially, where in effect they're acting as peer mentors to each other. Really good use of the technology at the modification to redefinition levels allows students to engage in exploration of areas that they might not have otherwise. Let me give you an example from some of my own practice. I have a background as a chemist, and in particular, one of the fascinating things that we can do with the technology is we can bring students into how chemists think at a much deeper level, even at the beginning of their studies, than we otherwise could, because we have tools for visualizing molecules. We have tools for simulating and visualizing interactions, reactions between molecules. And we have the tools for students to say, well, can I take some experimental data and not just play with a couple of toy experiments, but actually do some real analysis based upon what I've understood. One of the things I see happening in classrooms that are very successful at incorporating tools at the modification and redefinition level is I see students taking charge of the modification. Those are classrooms where the students aren't just waiting for something to happen. They're the classrooms where students say, oh wait, we've been doing this, but I also want to do this other thing, and I can see a better way of doing that. And there's a certain excitement, a certain ownership of the learning. There's a certain joy in figuring out, gee, I could do this in a different way and bring something different or new to my students. And I think keeping teaching practice as something enjoyable, lively, the reason that so many teachers become teachers in the first place, keeping the passion alive. So again, a continual re-examination of practice allows me as a teacher to make the best possible use of the technology to accomplish my goals.
Okay, we're going to keep on. I saw one person say that they agreed with me that they loved his voice. I don't know if your mileage may vary, but I would probably just do anything that man said. I don't know. I don't know. I just feel like I very much trust him. It's very soothing, very calming. So
I think it's important.
Now, I had this initially as an activity, and then I realized, well, this is a virtual ACE conference, and maybe a little bit difficult to do this in a maybe a traditional activity way. But I'm curious, and we don't have to spend a lot of time on this. You don't have to give me just. I'm just sort of off the top of your head. I'm curious if you think of a technology that you currently have at your disposal and a lesson that you teach, or honestly, you could come up with a fake one real quick. I'm not going to know the difference, but that does not or has not utilized much or any technology previously. So now that you've heard me explain the SAMR model, you've heard Dr. Rubin, the guy who came up with it, talk about the SAMR model. I'm curious, can you use what you've learned about it to adapt your lesson that maybe previously didn't have a lot of technology integration or technology use for higher levels of technology integration, so that you can kind of work your way up this SAMR ladder, as it were. I'll give us a minute or two to kind of think about this. If you don't want to share, if you're not comfortable sharing, that's fine. But I'm kind of curious if there's even just as we've been talking, if the wheels have been turning in your head about different types of technology that you could incorporate into something that you've already done, maybe without it. Any thoughts? You can think about it for a minute and give me your ideas here in just a sec. Mr. Steed says, I teach ESL conversation. My goal for the coming years to build conversation into my website. Right now, it's only a visual task. Mr. Steed, actually, you know what? I'm glad that you said that. And specifically, Mr. Steed, I'm glad that you are in here because one of the pieces of technology that I'm going to show here in just a few minutes, I think could be really great for ESL classes in particular. We'll get to that here in just a minute, but thank you. Anybody else? I know I kind of put you on the spot a little bit, but I don't want too much dead air. So let's see. So anyway, you don't have to share with me, but just for the purposes of kind of keeping things rolling, we're gonna keep moving. But think about it. Think about some of the things that you do in your classroom now, and think about ways that you could enhance them to sort of work your way up this ladder of technology integration. And I think one thing that sticks out to me is it's not just that you are incorporating more technology as you work your way up this ladder, but you're really, in many ways, I mean, it's increasing the rigor of the lessons that you're teaching. So it's not, I mean, it's not just adding tech. It's being sort of targeted in your approach, which I think is really important. So I was going to have you report out. There's a marmot. Anyway, so we're going to hear from Dr. Rubin one more time because I just couldn't help myself talking about the impact of the SAMR model, and then we'll get into talking about some actual specific resources that you guys might want to think about using. If I can get. Hang on, video trouble. Did I lose it? Oh, there it is. Okay, here we go.
Engaged in their teaching. I see that the success you get, seeing these outcomes makes for very happy teachers. Sometimes I see people say, well, I am using technology, but I'm a history teacher. And they're a math teacher, and my other neighbor here is a phys ed teacher. Well, we teach such different things. What do we all have in common? I say, well, hold on. If you use SAMR and associated models as a common language, sure, you're teaching different things, but you're going to start to see patterns, commonalities. You, the history teacher, might be using visualization tools to get to certain aspects of history at an augmentation to modification levels. And the phys ed teacher might be using visualization tools to get at something different in terms of sports. The math teacher might be doing it to get at certain ideas, say in algebra. But all of you are trying to get at some tricky concept for your students, making it more concrete to them through visualization tools. If you frame how and why you're using those tools in terms of SAMR, you now have a common language for discussion, and again, a common language to enable, facilitate the activities of a community of practice. The most basic benefit is, of course, improvement in student outcomes if you look at this through the lens of some standardized measurement instrument. And that's the first thing that people look at, and it's there. We saw it, for instance, in Maine in terms of how students were using the laptops, and we've seen it throughout whenever people look at this type of assessment of a program. So there's very definitely a net increase in, say, standard scores, etc., registered by students. But there's, to my mind at least, even more interesting outcomes in as much as working at the upper levels of SAMR, modification and redefinition, tends to be associated with greater gains by students in both comprehension, but not just, well, can they remember facts for an exam, but what can they do with what they've learned? What gives them greater agency, greater possibilities for using their knowledge. It also opens up more possibilities for forms of student interaction where we're looking at elements such as peer mentorship, learning from each other. And then there's one more thing that I view as, frankly, very crucial, and that is for teachers to talk about what they're doing, build up an effective community of practice in their school. For beginning teachers, my recommendation is look at the model, look at examples of the model, then get together in teams with other teachers and create what I call Roth SAMR ladders. Pick a unit of instruction, something that matters to you, and say, okay, as a team, we're going to figure out how to incorporate technology in such a way that we go up the levels of SAMR. Roth out some ideas, try to, if you will, get a little bit of a taste for what it's like to incorporate the technology in this fashion. And then, yes, translate that into something in your own practice. It's not everything you try at the upper levels is going to work out, but the practice of working at the upper levels of SAMR makes you realize that, okay, that didn't quite work out the way I wanted it to, but I can learn from it. And from this first trial, I can develop changes to my teaching practice that will make it better, more powerful, more effective next time. We've always been in a technology-rich field in education. After all, books are technologies, blackboards are technologies, sheets of paper, pencils, they're all technologies. And throughout the years, decades, centuries, we've evolved different ways of doing things by saying, oh wait, I now have a new tool that allows me to do some things differently, better, and so on. And the interesting thing with what we see happening with computer technologies is that the rapid evolution means that now we have a rapidly evolving array of possibilities available to us.
Okay, so that's Dr. Rubin again. Again, just really like listening to him talk. But one thing that I, as I've learned about the SAMR matter and a SAMR model, and as I've thought about it a little bit, what really comes to mind to me is a little something called Bloom's taxonomy, which I'm sure that you are all familiar with, right? We start at that basic, remembering level, right? You're relaying facts or pieces of information, and then you work your way up that pyramid. And as you go, it becomes more rigorous, and the learning is really transformed the higher up you go on Bloom's taxonomy, right? So all of these levels are important, which is one thing to point out, both with Bloom's and with SAMR. You don't want to neglect any of them, but obviously our goal is to become more rigorous and to offer our students more opportunities to sort of transform their learning. And the same is true with SAMR. We start at a substitution level where we're just sort of replacing technology, or replacing something that doesn't use a lot of technology with something that uses a little bit more, right? We're getting comfortable with it, not only for ourselves, but we're getting our students comfortable with it. And then as we move up the ladder, it becomes a little bit more rigorous. It requires a deeper understanding of not only of the technology that we're using, but a deeper understanding of what it is that you're teaching, so that students can apply that technology in the way that you're asking them to. So there's, I find SAMR, that is why I chose to focus on SAMR for this presentation, as opposed to also the other technological model that I talk about in the full presentation, because this one is, I think, the easiest one to kind of jump right on board with, because it's very familiar to something that you already know, and something that you're already pretty familiar with. So some questions to consider just as you go through, and because what I want you to do beyond this presentation, beyond the ACE conference, when you're going back to your program, you're thinking about the lessons that you teach and the types of technology that you use. I want you to sort of evaluate some of your lessons for yourself. You don't have to report it to me, but I just want you to think about it for yourself and for your students, and think about, are there some ways that we could apply greater amounts of technology in an effective way, right? Again, not just to say we're doing it, but to actually enhance the learning. So when we're thinking about substitution, and thinking about some of our practices, maybe you did start using Google Docs instead of paper, so you just think about some of these questions as you're kind of evaluating your lessons, to sort of figure out what level of SAMR your lessons fit into right now, which would then help you figure out what you need to do to enhance them a little bit, right? And really kind of goes to the why behind what you're using. So all that's great, but practically, how do you start? What do you do? What do you use? You might be asking yourself, like this very excited corgi who's just ready to go. Let's talk about it. So start with what you have. First of all, technology integration isn't about quantity, it's about quality, right? We've said that before. It's still true. Just throwing things at the wall to see what sticks is not really the best method for technology integration. We really need to think about what the technology can do, and what and the areas in which it can expand learning for your students. If you aren't familiar with a million apps and websites and tools, that's fine. Technology integration doesn't have to be complicated. It can really start with what you have already. A lot of us have smart boards. A lot of us have, most of you at your programs have access to computers of some kind, whether they're, sort of desktop computers or laptop computers. Start there. Maybe all you have is a projector screen and, students are bringing their cell phones. That's okay. There's something that you can use. It just may take a little bit of creativity to sort of come up with new ways to use that technology. But find free and easy to use resources that work with what you have. So think about the technology that you have at your disposal, not things that you wish you had, not things that, we just went through new budgets. So there's probably not a whole lot more money to buy a bunch of new stuff at this point in the year until next year. So thinking about the stuff that you have at your program at your disposal, it's sort of all about finding things that work with that are easy to use, that are quick to implement, and practice with and play with. Don't overburden yourself or your students by doing too much too quickly. And that's one of the things, honestly, that I think has kind of stalled some of our distance learning efforts in the past. Is we've thrown a lot of resources at folks over the years, and then we've just sort of said good luck, and then people kind of freeze and don't really necessarily know how to implement. So it's the same way with technology integration. Don't just sign up for a bunch of stuff and download a bunch of apps and try to use them all at once. Take your time. It's a process, not not something that you have to start right away. And find free resources, and we'll look at some here in just a minute. It's also important to plan. So think about your own strengths and weaknesses when it comes to technology, to content, to pedagogy, and plan for how you will address gaps in your knowledge, so that you can help students when they demonstrate gaps in their knowledge. Right. Another really important thing to do, which sometimes gets overlooked at conferences like these when we roll out new things or new ideas, is to test whatever it is that you're going to use before you roll it out, and always have a backup. Probably any of us that have been teachers know of a time where we have been really excited to use something that was new and kind of fun and engaging, and we thought our students were going to like it, but we didn't. Certainly I have this experience. Maybe I don't want to speak for everybody, but there was this, there have been times, particularly when I was new to teaching, when I was finding out a bunch of stuff and I was researching things to try and make my classroom more engaging, but I didn't test it out before I got in front of real live human students, and then inevitably the technology failed on me and I was just kind of stuck and I didn't really have a backup plan. So it's really important to test stuff out even before this presentation today, because I had not presented something I had not through Zoom shared a video clip before. I came over to where I was going to be doing this from early, and I tested it for about 45 minutes. I want to make sure my sound was right. I want to make sure that everything was working. In the same way, you got to prepare, no matter what you're using or no matter how simple it seems. And then consider your why. Is the technology that you plan to use adding value to your lessons? Are you just going through the motions to show your director, or to show me, or to show your program advisor that you are using technology? Or is the technology reinforcing skills that your students need, and reinforcing the learning that you are, and the information that you're trying to impart to them? So think about why you're using technology, because some things may not be as well suited for it as others, and that's okay. This is a process. It's not a one-time destination, right? And you're not always going to be at that upper level, that redefinition level of SAMR, because sometimes you have to build up from somewhere, right? So it's not about staying at the highest level all the time. It's just about evaluating your current practice and figuring out where you can enhance it. So I said that I would mention some resources. And if you have attended a distance learning training, or you have attended a Canvas training, or any of these things over the past, couple of years that I've done, you've probably heard me talk about a number of these, right? We're pretty much all, I think, familiar with, Google Docs. Most of us have some familiarity through that with Google Classroom. You may have heard me talk about Screencast-O-Matic in the past, which is a program that you can use to record both yourself and your screen. I found it very helpful when I was a distance learning teacher to walk students through processes and procedures if they were having trouble with something. I could actually record myself doing it and send that out using Screencast-O-Matic, and it was very easy. And then students had that to reference. Padlet is a great way to sort of have like a class homepage. In fact, I think there's a few people that I know of in here right now that have started Padlets over the past couple of years, which is great. And then Poll Everywhere is another great software, which is a great use of technology because it's available on your laptops, it's available on your tablets, it's available on phones, regardless of whether or not students have smartphones. You can use Poll Everywhere to sort of push out summative or formative evaluations of your students or checks for understanding. And again, it's just sort of incorporating technology in small ways that can be engaging and help students build some of that digital literacy. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about some of these things beyond sort of that summary that I just gave you, because between DL trainings and Canvas trainings and other things, you've probably heard me talk about that already. But if you have questions about any of these things, I'm happy to show you. You can always come to my office hours and we can talk all about it. But what I really want to show you today is something that I came across a couple months ago, probably back in May or June, called Flipgrid. And I know we don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to try and get through this quickly. But Flipgrid, and this is Mr. Steed, you mentioned ESL and conversation and all that stuff. This is something that not only could be, I think, beneficial and kind of fun and engaging for you to use with your regular ABE students, but I think Flipgrid could be really great for your ESL students. So what it is a free video discussion platform. You can create discussion topics as the instructor, and students then use their laptop, their phone, their tablet to create video responses, or they can upload a pre-made one to respond to those discussion topics. Students and instructors can comment and provide feedback on those responses. You can, it's got all those sort of social media tools like liking and all that kind of stuff. I feel like I sounded really old when I said that, but anyway, students can interact with each other in the comments of their videos. They can add attachments, they can add GIFs, they can add emojis. It's got all sorts of like Instagram type filters that you can add to it, and all these different things, not only to allow students to sort of be a little bit more engaged maybe when they're just answering a discussion prompt, but really to sort of flex their creative muscles a little bit and give that a chance to flourish a little bit. So when I found Flipgrid, I was really excited about it and really excited to share it with other teachers. So this is kind of what the dashboard looks like, and you can have all sorts of different topics that you set up and just have active, and you can just push them out through a Flipgrid link whenever you want. You can have sort of like an introductory thing. Hello, I am, and they can talk about themselves. I set up one for today that I'm going to have you guys go to in a minute, or actually after this is over, so that you can kind of look at it and see how it works about active learning with technology. But this is kind of what it looks like. So you log in, you've got your different Flipgrid discussion prompts here. And then when you click on it, you can edit it or you can go into more detail about it. So, for example, maybe you are trying to, as part of some digital literacy that you're trying to impart to your students, you could create a Flipgrid prompt and attach, because you can attach different, either attachments, files from your computer, or attach articles that you find online. So maybe I want students to read some articles about finding quality sources of information online, or how to identify misinformation or disinformation online. So maybe I have students read those attachments and then use what they've learned to create a public service announcement contrasting the differences between misinformation and disinformation, how to spot it, and warning about the dangers of falling for and sharing disinformation. Well, students could read those articles that I've attached, and then they just click on this add response button, whether they're using a laptop with a camera and a microphone, or their phone, which they probably all have already. They can just film themselves completing this assignment or whatever assignment it is that you have for them. So if you want to check it out, I've actually made this one public. You do have to have a password to access it. But if you go to flipgrid.com /4 lowercase f 793448, it'll ask you for a password. The password is technology with a capital T. It is case sensitive. It will take you directly to a Flipgrid discussion prompt that I put. And before I move on to the next slide, I'm going to put it in the chat really quickly. Should have already had that. Flipgrid.com /4f793448. So if you'll go to that link and then type in that password of technology, you can check out a Flipgrid that literally took me like 5 seconds to make. There's also, if you're familiar with Canvas Commons, how you can download things that other people have created. They have something similar where you can go online and find things that other teachers have made public, other discussion prompts and things like that, and then you can edit it as much as you want. So this was a discussion prompt that I found, and then I edited it. I changed the GIF out on it. I changed some of the text, and then again, it took me no time at all. So once you do that, you just click add response, and then you can see all the different options that you have at your disposal there. So Flipgrid, I was really excited about when I learned about it. Maybe something that you want to check out for yourself. And I know we're almost out of time, so I'm just going to kind of breeze through this. Some final thoughts: quality over quantity. Make sure that the technology that you're using is well suited for the lessons that you're having students do and the objectives that you have set out for your students. Remember that integrating technology is a process. It's not a one-time thing. You're also not going to live at that highest level of SAMR all the time. And it's important to consider the why behind the technology that you incorporate and when you incorporate that technology. And use SAMR, and this says and/or TPACK because I forgot to edit the slide, to plan and select resources. Remember, this is sort of an abridged version of a presentation that I did for ATN that will be available soon. So if you're curious about that other model, please be on the lookout for that. But think about this. Think about your practices. Think about SAMR. Think about how you can enhance some of the things that you already are doing in your classroom. And then obviously you can contact me about any or all of these resources, and we can talk. We can set up a time where we can meet. If you can't come to my office hours, I would be happy to help. If there are not questions, that is it for me. I'm 1 minute over. I apologize for my time slot, but I don't want to keep you guys from lunch. So I will let you guys get out of here. I do believe that LaCarol put a survey for this session in the chat earlier in the chat, about 11:03. She put the survey in there. So if you would fill out that survey for me, it helps the ACE folks sort of plan for the types of things that they want to offer in the future. And it gives me an idea of if I've made any sense or not. And it's okay. I can take it. If you just want to trash me on the survey, that's okay. I'm used to it. So there you go. Thank you so much for coming. And
Thank you.
We'll look forward to checking out the technology that you guys are using in your classroom. Bye, guys.
Thank you.